Hi, welcome to the Mostly Mike Show. I'm Mike, and today I'll be unboxing, installing, and demonstrating a few uses of the rear rack for the Coleman CT200U EX mini bike, or as I call mine, Trail Force 1. If you haven't seen the Trail Force 1 video, check it out. I'll include the links. I wonder what CT stands for. Anyway, I'm sure that you all have been hanging on the edge of your seats in anticipation for this video, so without further delay, let's get this party started. Obviously, no pimped-out mini bike is complete without a rear cargo rack to strap down your, cargo. You know, like chainsaws, trail building stuff, and whatnots. I ended up finding this rack at the Coleman Powersports website. They claim that this will turn your mini bike into a pack mule, and I'm going to test this thing to see for myself if it's mule or mulearchy. It was $39.99 for the rack itself, plus a nominal shipping charge from Coleman Powersports. Let's see what's in the box. Of course, nearly everything, it's made in China. There's an assembly book, a box of parts, which includes a longer axle with some spacer bushings, as well as rack support arms. There's two nearly identical brackets, one of which with a bolt in it. You only need one of these brackets depending on your model of bike, and that bolt will be used with that bracket. And finally, the rack itself, which actually seems decently made. And there's a couple things that they want from you. If you have a set of metric wrenches, just grab the whole set. If you grab what's on the list here, add a 13mm because you're going to need it. First step is to get the ass end off the ground. The book specifies a bucket or a milk crate, but these seem to lift it too high, although they would probably work. I found that a 6x6 with a 4x4 placed over it under the frame gets the back tire about an inch or so off the ground, which is ideal because the back wheel will drop when you remove the axle. And I don't mean axle rose, or axle foley. When you loosen the chain tensioner nuts, try to loosen both sides the same amount, and don't get carried away, they only need loosened. I'm just going to loosen them until I can spin them by my finger. If you still have your chain guard on, unlike mine, it might behoove you to take it off. Loosen the axle nut using the 17 and 19mm wrenches. Before you pull the axle out, I want you to observe that on the sprocket side there's a spacer with a washer, and on the brake side or passenger side in America, there's a spacer. If you get them mixed up, no worries, they are the same. But whatever you do, don't lose them. You're going to need them. The back tire will also fall to the ground when you pull the axle out, and this is normal. Okay, so if you take your 17mm, wiggle it a little bit while pushing on the opposite end of the axle, you're going to feel the tensioner drop away, and keep wiggling it. Lift up on the back tire a little bit. And that axle will pop right out. Should pop right out. And this is why I didn't want to lift the ass end up too high. Okay, so we have our spacers that dropped out, and we have our wheel resting on the ground. Be sure not to lose that. Now let's loosely assemble the rack supports to the rack. So you can see on the instructions, they don't have these marked right or left or in or out or anything like that, but I'm assuming that they kind of veer inward. The bolts go through the small hole in each support, and the supports should splay toward the center of the rack. Which kind of makes sense because the rack is wider than the bike. So I'm just going to put these on. I'm not going to tighten them up just yet. And we'll see how that works. Next, we'll remove the seat by taking out the two small nuts and bolts under the seat. So just pull the bolts out, both sides, and the seat lifts right off. Next, we're going to remove the fender bolt, which is slightly above my Trail Force 1 sticker. That bolt is what holds the adapter bracket to the fender. Although I believe that either bracket will work on the CT200U EX, after carefully scrutinizing these brackets in their most intimate parts, I found that there's a little less meat on one of these brackets around the two holes. and I feel pretty certain that this is the correct one for the CT200U EX. I am making these bolts just snug for now. Bolt back down through the fender, put your nut on underneath. Probably wouldn't hurt to Loctite these, even though the nut is kind of a locking nut. I'm just going to kind of leave that loose so it'll slide a little bit to suit whatever our needs are for alignment. Okay, so our rack came with these bolts here pre-installed. We're going to take them off, and it looks like in the instructions our rack is just going to sit down on here, and we're just going to reinstall those same bolts down through our adapter bracket. I'm not going to tighten anything up until I get everything aligned and make sure that I didn't mess up and misread the instructions. Grab your axle along with the extra spacers included in the kit. Doing a side-by-side comparison, you can see that our new axle is considerably longer than the old one. We're not going to use anything from the old axle except for these two spacers. I just put this together and learned the hard way that you do need all 4 spacers in here. But as far as this goes, just keep it in a safe place for a spare, I guess. If you're like me and you can't throw anything away, which who would want to throw a nice big bolt like that away anyhow? Remember, for less confusion, that all 4 spacers are the same size. Be sure to thread the axle through in the following order. So we're ready to install the axle. Now we're going to go through the support for the rack, spacer, chain tensioner, just in case you can't see that. Chain tensioner. I'm going to move the camera in here where you can see. I'm going to install one of these spacers inside. My hand might be in the way to see properly, but you got to pick your wheel up and wiggle it around here. You're going to feel the brake assembly moving, etc. But you need to pick that up to where the holes line up. Okay. Put your axle in. Okay, now I got to move everything to the opposite side. Alright, I had to change my battery there. Okay, so we had our washer that dropped out earlier that goes between the bearing and the inner spacer. So we're going to get that and the inner spacer together. Put it in there while pushing off the opposite side on the axle. Nice catch. Okay, so there's that. The axle's through. Just take your brake thing, make sure all the washers are behind the frame bracket. You might have to pull back on the wheel a little bit. And then at that point, we'll stick our outer spacer on. I said outer space. And then finish pushing your axle through. Then put your nut on. And I'm hoping that I'll kind of pan across here so you can see the order that everything goes in. So you got the bolt head, you got your support bracket, outer spacer, you got your chain tensioner, frame, inner spacer, brake assembly, wheel, your sprocket here, which is connected to the wheel. You got your washer, inner spacer, frame, chain tensioner, outer spacer, support bracket, nut, axle. Spin the nut on hand tight and then adjust your chain tensioners. So next we're going to tension up our chain, and they want about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of deflection, which we're kind of close there, but I always measure and make sure both sides when you start are the same distance. So we're 71 9/16 from the nut. No, I'm only kidding. You know that. We're about 7/16 from the nut, and I measured the other side and we're pretty close to 7/16. So what I do is go a half turn on each side and check it. Go another half turn, maybe I'll go a full turn, and then go a full turn on the opposite side. Now, the deflection is about a ½ inch roughly there. And this is a new bike, so it's gonna break in a little bit yet too. I looked in every manual that I have, and I haven't been able to locate the torque spec for the axle nut. The book says just tighten it, so that's what I'll do. And on that note, we can now tighten the remainder of the bolts, starting at the fender, then the 2 rack adapter bracket bolts, finally working our way to the support arm bolts. So all that's left is putting the seat on, which is pretty obvious how it goes. Just line your bolt holes up, get your last 2 bolts in, nuts on, tighten them, you're done. I must say that I'm super impressed at the quality and sturdiness of this rack. Although the book states a limit of 15 pounds maximum cargo capacity, I'll be sure to obey this and weigh everything, being certain that I'll never exceed 15 pounds. Right. I have no doubt that it would hold my fat 210-pound ass. The mini cargo net added a nice useful touch to hold my whatnots for maintaining my trails. I might add that the rack held this stuff nicely, although I might want to experiment to strap this stuff in long ways to avoid catching on trees and getting clothes hung. Yeah, it's not massive, but if it were any bigger, I think it would actually be too bulky. I think it'll hold this, and hang on one second. I don't think I'd be afraid to throw this hedge trimmer on there too, to situate it right. Got these nice little pegs sticking down underneath that you can hook extra bungee cords to, but that's not going anywhere. You just gotta watch you don't go through any narrow passages. I'll put a link below for the mini cargo net, which going through this link into Amazon and buying anything helps this channel grow through small commissions that I earn from any sale, even stuff not mentioned in the video. If you found this video useful, please be sure to click the thumbs up and subscribe if you're new to here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.